Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Today is the 8th of February and this is a Ukraine war update news, extra thing, jobby, whatever, where I give you the news before I do the frontline update. So what's been going on overnight and in the last 24 hours that is newsworthy? The first thing I do always is give you the Ukrainian released figures for the Russian losses, all the usual caveats. Is this accurate? Is it propaganda? Do the Russians produce an equivalent statistic? No, they don't. But I find these indicative and useful for seeing how bad, in general, the day was the day before, even if the figures aren't themselves 100% accurate. 910 losses for liquidated personnel is another terribly bad day for the Russians. There were over 1,000 yesterday, which means that really over 2 days we've had 2,000 losses. That's massive, and it shows that there have been some really grinding attacks and losses in and around Bakhmut, but we've also got around Bilorivka, we've got fighting right up in Kupiansk in Svatova, sorry, not Svatova, Kremina area, and obviously Vuhledar as well, and indeed Avdivka. So there's a whole number of places that are actually apparently being pretty bad for Russia, where they might be making some gains in territory. They are losing a lot in troops. In other places, they are just losing a lot of troops. So yeah, 8 tanks, 15 APCs, 4 artillery systems, 1 anti-aircraft system, 1 aircraft and 1 helicopter. That's a Su-25 that was lost that we do have evidence of, and a helicopter. Not sure about the helicopter evidence. 3 UAVs, 3 drones, 5 vehicles, and 3 pieces of special equipment. We've seen quite a lot of pieces of special equipment recently. I saw an excavator get damaged by improvised dropped munitions from drone dropped munitions. So that's one piece of special equipment. Apparently, there's a bridge layer taken out yesterday in one of the videos. So the idea that pro-Russians will say, well, what's your evidence for this? Is just propaganda, blah blah blah, all the usual kind of crap. But actually, there's an awful lot of evidence coming out. I mean, I could show you an awful lot of stuff. Just before I do show you some, the air view destroyed 7 boats of the Russian army, with which they are going to ferry sabotage groups to the right bank of the Dnieper, and damaged 2 Grad installations near Leshki, from which the Russian army fired at Kherson. Operational Command South has said, Natalia Humanyuk. Be interesting to see tomorrow whether we see some boats on there, warships or boats, and those boats will probably just be stolen sort of speedboats that they're using, but they're still, craft that's taken out. And 2 anti-aircraft systems. I don't know whether we've got 1 from yesterday, so you might see 2 tomorrow. It'd be interesting to see if that is reflected in tomorrow's stats. As far as evidence goes, so Su-25 was taken down near Bakhmut. The pilot ejected and was captured alive. So there is, you've got the evidence of that plane going down. Now, this is interesting. This is actually not from yesterday, but is this photo's just come out, published on the 4th of February. Apparently, we have another shot down Su-35S, and this is a recent fighter, and I think there's only one definite loss of one of these before. There was another claimed loss, but not too sure about that. So this appears to be the second Su-35S. This is an upgraded version, I think, of the Su-27, and the Su-35S had its maiden flight in 2011. Really quite a recent bit of kit. Single pilots, super maneuverable aircraft, twin engine, single seat. Second one has been taken down in recent times, and that will be a bit of a loss for the Russian Air Force. They have had a bad couple of weeks with some quite considerable losses of aircraft and helicopters. And we are now starting to see the evidence of that, because I was saying, where is the evidence for these aircraft loss? We're seeing this every day. At the time, we were seeing, days like this, and then some days there were like 3 or 4, or 4 and 2, so, 6 loss in one day type thing, or whatever it was. And we are now starting to that evidence is now filtering through. Then when you look at the evidence for the APCs and tanks, my goodness, there's a lot of video evidence just coming through now of losses in Vuhledar, losses in Vodyane, just south of Avdivka, losses indeed in a number of places, even kind of, I think, around Spirin and maybe a few other places. and just losing a lot of equipment. And here is, a BMP-1, BMP-2, T-80BV, the Minesweeper up front can be seen. So they are, and there's just a lot of this. There's, here's a T-80 being destroyed, etc., etc. The idea is that there are so many pieces of video. I mean, I've just picked just a couple random, but there are columns of vehicles that have been lost around Vuhledar, and we have the evidence. We've got the receipts to back it up. Basically, is what I'm saying. Okay. Uh, in the Nizhny Novgorod region of the Russian Federation, a fire has started in an oil refinery. Again, this is not unusual, but this is a sort of either partisan activity or drone strikes or whatever that has meaningful ramification. That this is what you want. You want to hit the infrastructure in Russia. We've heard recently Ukrainian administration officials saying we will hit things behind enemy lines. We won't do it with the GLSTB. We won't do it with HIMARS because we've got an agreement with the Americans. But we've got our own drones, and we've got no compunction with taking out stuff within the Russian territories. So yeah, you'll see more of that. On the flip side, there's a massive fire yesterday at a factory that produces drones for Ukraine. Now, actually, this is an American-owned company, I believe. The factory of the Edge Autonomy Company that produces unmanned aerial vehicles, so drones, in Mariupol in Latvia has been damaged. The cause of the fire is unknown. The investigation is underway. Either partisan or outright kind of sabotage from Russian agents. In those Balkan states, you are likely to see, Baltic states, you're likely to see quite a few operatives, Russian operatives around there. Active. So yeah, that's a real shame. And other information is Kharkiv, a city in the northeast, Ukraine's second city, was hit by at least 6, possibly 7 S-300 missiles. So we've got Ukraine here, we've got Kharkiv up there, and yeah, been hit by a number of S-300s, which are surface-to-air missiles used in their secondary mode, which renders them fairly inaccurate compared to what they should be, what other maybe cruise missiles are. These are sent in and do quite a bit of damage, but not necessarily to the places they are intending to do damage to. But the Russians don't appear to mind. It doesn't matter if they hit civilian stuff. It still has an effect as far as they're concerned. But of course, the idea is that this in effect could be a war crime, taking on targets well within civilian areas that they could use more effective, more accurate ordnance to do. So they're using the wrong missile to do or rocket to do their work, and that could be constituted as a war crime. Okay, 4 rockets hit a civil industry facility. Now, you don't know whether that's actually what they're intending to hit. That is, it's all kind of vague, isn't it, when you're both defending and attacking? So they'll say they've hit key infrastructure. Ukrainians will say they've hit civil industry facility if it hasn't been an outright strike on an apartment block. So there's a large fire after the impact with the buildings completely destroyed. Missiles also landed in the central park. Okay, that's less going to be an intended target for the Russians. But a range of places hitting Kharkiv and hit with those S-300 missiles. So that is not great for Kharkiv. Today, Poltava region received 45 Starlink satellite communications stations from Polish partners and benefactors. This is not to say that these have been given by Elon Musk or Starlink themselves, but these have been bought by benefactors and particularly Polish, and given to Poltava region, which is there. Starlink communication systems are really, really useful. Any kind of stuff like that. It's not just about giving guns and pieces of military equipment. Communication comms equipment is super, super important, as well as energy generators and all the other stuff. Current list of confirmed Western tanks going to Ukraine. And you look at this, you say, oh, that's pretty good, 182. But actually, this list has been very poorly thought out, because It's arguably a lot more than that. So tanks confirmed for 2023, 178 Leopard 1A5s, although that itself isn't necessarily 178 going to be delivered in 2023, and they do need to be fixed up. 90 to 120 T-72 from Czechoslovakia, so they are upgrading a bunch paid for by the Netherlands and America. 30 PT-91 Twardy, so that's Poland. They are Soviet-era tanks that they are giving. And then you've got your Leopard 2s, 2A6s and 2A4s from Germany and Poland. Another 32 T-72 from Poland. And then we've got these other dribs and drabs of Leopard 2s coming from various nations. And you've got 31 Abrams and 14 Challenger 2s. So this is added up to be about 430 to 450 odd tanks. That is moving towards the upper range of tanks that Ukraine asked for, which is phenomenal. And you don't know, there could be more tanks given over the next several months. It'll be interesting to see whether the West are starting to exhaust the kinds of stocks that they can give, or whether there is more in the tank for them, so to speak. And Leopard 2 A6s, the German ones. So these are German ones here, 14 to A6s. I presume the A6, that's the most recent configuration. Battle tanks will be available by the end of March, as according to the German Bundeswehr. So that's excellent. Main battle tanks will be available by the end of March. Fantastic. That's really quick. The French Senate has almost unanimously called for an increase in military assistance to Ukraine. The text of the document of the upper house of the Senate states. Now, this is really, really good news, because, as this person here says, France is a significant military power, but they've been fairly anonymous compared to the UK and USA and others. But it will make a huge difference if they choose to scale up. Now, that's correct. They're a huge military power. That's also possibly a little bit harsh. So France have actually given a bunch of stuff, but they don't generally headline the stuff they've been doing or sending. As I've said many times before, traditionally the French military has been quite quiet on the assistance they give around the globe, historically speaking, not just Ukraine. And so when they give a bunch of stuff, they don't do what a lot of other nations are doing, which is telling the Russians or telling the world that they're giving X, Y, and Z. So you end up seeing a bunch of stuff, like the Caesars end up being there, and they are really useful bits of kit, and then more Caesars. And then we've got, but then they did start saying, oh, we're going to send these AMXs, and they opened the door to actually the main battle tanks being given. Arguably, the French were the linchpin in oiling the wheels of the later military assistance, big military assistance. And hopefully, if this Senate text is to be taken seriously, we might see more stuff from the French. They've got a huge, one of the biggest in the world, military industrial complex. They are one of the biggest exporters of military equipment in the world. Top three, I think. The third, I think, after Russia, and it'd be interesting to see Russia. It will be in the top five after this year. So that is, very significant, and let's hope that comes to fruition. I will talk about this more in an extra, but just to let you know that Ukraine is lagging behind Turkey, Serbia, Albania in readiness for EU accession. So there's a lot of talk about Ukraine joining the EU, and they're trying to rush it through. And then there's these kind of realists going, hang on, actually, there's a lot of countries that are more advanced in their applications than you. So from Britain's point of view, we have left the EU, and that was a hell of a headache. And it's still not finished, right? So 6 years since a vote, and we still can't work out what we're doing. And we've got these protocols and all sorts of stuff, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it's incredibly complex. Trying to extricate yourself from this set of rules is incredibly complex, and I won't cast my opinion on how damaging that's been to our economy, but you can imagine my position. Anyway, it's difficult enough to leave. It's 5 times more difficult to join. So when Ukraine is saying, yeah, we want to join the EU, and lots of people in the EU saying, yeah, we actually want you to join, you got people like Montenegro saying, hang on, we still haven't joined, we've been, and these other countries, Albania, whatever, but hey, and we've been trying to join for much longer than they have. Don't forget us. So there's this desire to get Ukraine on board as almost a reward for Ukraine standing up to Russia. So there's this will within the EU to get them to join really quickly, but they still have to pass lots of uh, you know tests. Still have to jump loads of hurdles. Just before Brexit, we were scared. And say what you like about Boris Johnson, right? Before Brexit, he was 50-50 on. He had written apparently an article to pro Leave article and a pro EU article. Read it, and then he had to make a decision which side he was going to go. And then he said, "Right, I'm going to go Leave." Very calculated decision. All his family are Remainers, and etc. etc. And he went to Leave, and then jumped full on and went in the deep end, and took us, broadly out of the EU. But he was saying at the time, and actually this was an outright lie, but he said that Turkey are just about to join the EU, right? And he said there's going to be 80 million Turks now coming to immigrate into the UK. You don't want that, so vote Leave. We want to get out of the EU, so that doesn't happen. The reality is Turkey was so far away from being able to join the EU, right? You have to the freedom of press, corruption, all these things. Like people say, oh, the EU is corrupt. The EU is compared to nations outside the EU. The EU is not corrupt. All places are corrupt. I could talk to you about UK corruption, about EU corruption, and US corruption. I could talk to you about Chinese corruption and Russian corruption and Australian corruption. But the EU, compared to nations outside the EU, are a bastion of, yes, bureaucracy, but a democracy, and they demand that you have to jump through a bunch of hoops, corruption wise, and that's just one of the areas before you can get in the EU. And Ukraine are a long way away from that. So that's why you're seeing them sack a load of people, arrest a load of people, trying to get the corruption stuff sorted. Because if they don't do that, they won't get into the EU. Freedom of press, but to go back to Turkey, actually they've stalled their accession now. They've stopped trying to get into the EU for the time being. But they wouldn't have got in. And look, it's 2022 and they still haven't got in, right? So in 2016, they're just about to get in the EU. You'll have 80 million Turks. 6 years later, they've stopped trying to get in because they couldn't jump through all those hoops, and they were relatively close compared to Ukraine. So my point of saying all that is that Ukraine have an awful long way to go before they can get into the EU. Whether that can be expedited even more is up for grabs. But as far as points go, Ukraine are pretty much down there. Ukraine has 69 out of 132 points, where you've got Turkey had 94, Montenegro 99.5, Serbia 98, Albania 84.5, all well ahead of Ukraine as far as being able to exceed into the EU. So you got these things: fundamentals, internal market, competitiveness and growth, green agenda, resources, agriculture, external relations, etc. And all of these will involve things like corruption and lots of other things. These are just headline areas. So lots of work for Ukraine to do. Don't think it'll be quick. The Ukraine will want it to be quick, and a lot of other people will want it to be quick. But he's not known for that. Zelensky's next thing, arriving in the UK on February the 8th. That's today. So he's arriving today. Really sudden appearance. I don't know whether this is replacing the European. He was due to, and I don't know if he still is, due to visit the EU and make a speech, but it got leaked. And they're really tight on security for obvious reasons. And they're really angry about that, which is why he suddenly turned up today with no forward announcement of this, because the FSB might turn up with a little prod of polonium and then Zelensky's dead. So they need to keep really tight on the security there. So anyway, he's turned up. He'll arrive in the UK to meet Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Ukrainian servicemen who've been training in the country, Sky News reported, citing the Prime Minister's office. And he'll be asking, already know what he'll be doing there, says this person, might be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a bit pro-Russian there. He'll be asking for stuff for sure. Absolutely, of course. Of course, that's what he's going to be doing. And cementing those relationships with a relatively new prime minister, that he doesn't have that kind of Boris Johnson relationship that he had previously. So he needs to do a bit of schmoozing, and then hopefully, as far as he's concerned, cement a whole bunch of other stuff from the UK. This has been doing the rounds on social media. Saw a video yesterday, says Tim White, a screenshot. Russia thinks it's positive PR. The mind boggles. These women have all lost their sons or husbands, but never mind that they get a new fur coat from the terrorist state. Fair swap. So this is in the occupied regions, I think. These are like Donetsk and Luhansk, people that have lost their their loved ones. Their compensation appears to be fur coats. Widows of dead soldiers from Kremlin's sham republics only get fur coats as compensation, and but actually, Russia have got a weird history of doing this. You know, they've got form here. Some claim here is that they're highly likely stolen fur coats as well, but I can't confirm that. But however miserable the compensation may seem, some people in Russia's remote districts are sometimes even less fortunate. So for other people, they've been given like larder cars and things like that. But as you go further east and you get into more ethnic areas, you get things like frozen fish were handed out on Sakhalin in the Russian Far East as a compensation for the eliminated mobilized soldiers. In Tuva in southern Siberia, where the current defense minister of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, was born, sheep carcasses and even wood were given as compensation for relatives killed in the war in Ukraine. And here you've got the evidence of that. This isn't just propaganda, although propagandists will jump on this, like this article was saying. Obviously, how ridiculous is this? I guess on the one hand, if this translates into money, it's still the same thing. You're giving something of value. It's whether these guys value fur coats rather than money, and whether money is acceptable and how much money. And there's a whole thing about compensation. I guess when you're mobilized, it's rather less than if if you're volunteering for the armed forces and you die, then maybe that's why you signed up for this. But if you're mobilized, you're forced into this. So there's possibly a lot more call for compensation in that respect. I don't know. I haven't really thought about compensation before. Anyway, there you go. That's the news for today. Hope that was useful. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for hanging out. Check out my frontline update that will be coming shortly, hot on the heels of this, or at least a couple of hours on the heels of this. Thank you for all your support. Please check out the description for ways that you can support the channel, and that allows me to keep doing this. And hopefully it's of use to you. Anyway, toodle pips. Speak to you later.